Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a reclusive ex-arson investigator refuses to bow to a tyrannical HOA, a quiet North Carolina forest becomes the battleground for sabotage, lies, and a war over land, power, and freedom. They came to control him. What they got was a fight they never saw coming. I bought this place 15 years ago, back when most folks were still flocking to the suburbs like moths to porch lights. 6 acres of North Carolina pinewood silence. No sidewalks, no streetlights, no kids on scooters. Just me, a rifle, a couple of trail cams, and a respect for lines. Property lines, legal lines, moral lines. I don't cross them, and I sure as hell don't let anyone cross mine. My name's Ensign Mayfield. I'm 44. Used to be an arson investigator back in Asheville, before the politics got thicker than the smoke. These days, I live alone in a 1-story timber frame home I built up from a dilapidated shack with my own damn hands. There's a concrete pump house out back that feeds the well, a few solar backups, and a heavy-duty electric panel near the southern fence line, the nerve center for everything from water pressure to my camera network to the server vault that stores 24-hour surveillance. I don't do neighbors, and I sure as hell don't do HOAs, which brings me to Clear Pines. They're not officially part of my life, on paper. Their last newly built McMansion sits maybe 300 feet east of my fence line, and from there, it's vinyl-sided conformity as far as the eye can roll. Clear Pines HOA is your typical cul-de-sac cartel, run by a woman named Karen Vincent. Yes, that's her real name. Blonde, bobbed, and buoyed by power. Think if a Pinterest board had a soul and carried a clipboard. At first, it was background noise. I'd see the signs, the newsletters, the occasional drone camera buzzing too close. Then came the letter, registered mail, thick envelope, the works. It said I was cordially invited to join Clear Pines HOA under their new voluntary compliance initiative. They'd even prepared a pre-filled contract. How thoughtful. According to them, my property visually disrupts the harmony of the community aesthetic and represents a potential safety deviation from established neighborhood expectations. Whatever the hell that means. I filed the letter in my wood stove. 2 days later, a second letter appeared, this time slid under my gate, unsigned, and printed on regular paper. Neglecting to align with community standards may result in neighborhood action. Neighborhood action. Sounded more like a threat than an invitation. That week, I started noticing odd things. A fresh set of surveyor's stakes hammered along my southern border, bright pink flags with HOA logos. My motion lights would trigger at 3 or 4 in the morning, and when I reviewed the footage, I'd catch vague silhouettes loitering near the fence. No vandalism, not yet. Just presence, the kind that's meant to rattle you. I didn't rattle easy. I installed a new game cam with infrared and thermal. Then I posted 3 metal signs along the road. Private property, not subject to HOA. Armed response likely. The next escalation came 3 nights later. I was inside cleaning one of my shotguns, nothing fancy, a Remington 870, when I heard a soft knock. Not the door, the fence. Subtle, like someone tapping a stick. I walked outside with the barrel pointed low and my boots quiet. Found a manila envelope duct taped to the outer post. Inside was a final warning from Clear Pines HOA, listing violations like unregistered outbuilding, unsanctioned security lighting, and, my personal favorite, visual nonconformity with HOA-designated perimeter landscaping aesthetics. Again, not a member. Never had been, never will be. The next morning, I drove down to the county registrar and pulled up the land plat maps. My boundaries hadn't shifted an inch in over 3 decades. My parcel predates the HOA by nearly 20 years. Legally, I might as well be Vatican City. Later that week, I caught Karen herself trespassing. She wasn't subtle. Drove up in her spotless white BMW, parked outside the fence like she owned the forest, and took pictures of my house with a phone the size of a TV dinner tray. I stepped outside and waved. She looked startled, like she'd expected me to be away. Maybe dead. I just wanted to document the irregularities, she said. I asked her what irregularities those were. She started on about citing color codes and grass length ordinances. I told her politely but firmly to get the hell off my land before the automatic sprinklers activated. They didn't, but the bluff worked. A week after that, more stakes appeared, this time inside the fence near the panel box. That told me everything I needed to know. They were probing, testing the fence, looking for weaknesses. So I did what I always do when someone tries to force my hand. I pushed back harder. I reinforced the perimeter, upgraded the locks, rotated the cameras, buried steel spikes beneath vulnerable fence panels, and installed motion-activated floodlights connected to a backup battery in case the grid went dark. I wasn't paranoid. I was ready. HOAs like Clear Pines don't play fair. They wear khakis and smile at you during bake sales. But under the pastel polos and homeowners' manuals, they're little tyrannies waiting to bloom. They don't want compliance. They want control. And unfortunately for them, I've spent most of my adult life catching arsonists and liars who thought they could bend rules to their own advantage. Karen and her clipboard brigade were about to find out. I don't bend. I dig in. It started with a call from my neighbor, Lucille Harper, widow 71, sharp as a tack and twice as observant. She's the only person within shouting distance I'd trust to water my plants if I keeled over. Lucille lived about 2 lots up the ridge and kept herself busy with birdwatching, bourbon, and the occasional neighborhood scandal, mostly in that order. "Ensign," she said on the phone, low and serious. "I saw people with flashlights near your south fence last night. Around 3 men, climbing over. Looked like they had tools." I paused. "You sure it wasn't the utility company? They weren't dressed for work. Hoodies. One of them had a duffel bag. They didn't come back the same way they went in." That same morning, I walked the southern line and found exactly what I expected. One section of fencing slightly pried back, boot prints in the damp soil, and, most tellingly, fresh, angled cuts on the brambles that had grown too thick for a clean pass. Someone had macheted a path in. I pulled the camera footage. Infrared caught blurry shapes. 3 figures creeping along the tree line, one of them carrying what looked like bolt cutters. No one touched anything, but that wasn't the point. This wasn't vandalism. It was reconnaissance. The next day, a clipboard showed up under my windshield wiper while I was getting groceries in town. The form was neatly filled out. Notice of upcoming compliance inspection, Clear Pines HOA. The kicker, there was a checkbox next to voluntary access granted, already marked yes. I hadn't signed anything. The paper trail was starting to get cute. I scanned the local HOA bylaws, don't ask how I got them, and noticed a clause that should have made any attorney sneeze. It read, "Properties adjacent to Clear Pines, though not formally under jurisdiction, may be subject to aesthetic evaluation and advisory reports in the event of neighborhood concern." Basically, they'd written themselves a fake badge and now thought they were real cops. I compiled my own packet, satellite photos of my land over the last decade, the county's official maps, and a notarized affidavit from the previous owner confirming he'd never been part of Clear Pines and had refused 4 offers to sell easement. Rights. When the second fake inspection notice showed up, this time mailed with a forged signature in my name, I contacted a lawyer. His name was Royce Collier, an ex-Marine turned litigator who specialized in land disputes. I liked him immediately when he said, "Let's preempt the horse crap with a flaming chainsaw." Royce sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA's legal department, along with copies of the forged documents and a reminder that impersonating a landowner on official correspondence was a felony in North Carolina. We didn't hear back. Not officially. Unofficially. Oh, they doubled down. That weekend, a municipal code enforcement officer showed up. Claimed there had been complaints from multiple concerned residents that I was storing chemicals improperly near a power source. Said there were reports of erratic behavior, too. I stood there, in muddy boots and flannel, staring at this poor bastard while he looked at my breaker box like it might explode. "What chemicals?" I asked. "Well, we don't know, sir. Just, a tip." "From who?" "We can't disclose that." I invited him in. Showed him the locked cabinet with labeled containers, lawn fuel, kerosene for the emergency generator, regular maintenance stuff. All logged, clean, and up to code. The man actually apologized before he left. It got worse. 2 nights later, I caught a teenager throwing rocks at one of my cameras. When I walked out with a flashlight, he ran, left behind a bike and a hoodie with a Clear Pines logo on it. The next morning, my mailbox had been forced open, and inside was a neatly folded flyer, "Join the community, or be the reason for its downfall." I started to wonder if this was still some suburban theater performance, or if it had become a full-blown campaign. Lucille told me that at the last HOA meeting, Karen Vinson had held up a printed satellite image of my property and said, "This is the cancer on our border. He refuses to participate. He doesn't belong. Someone actually clapped. Another neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Janice, pulled me aside at the co-op. Said she'd heard Karen was calling me a prepper extremist and telling people I was dangerous and off-grid, which was funny since I pay my taxes, buy local, and go to church more often than Karen ever would admit to. I filed a harassment report with the county sheriff. The deputy listened politely but said without direct threats or evidence of criminal intent, there wasn't much they could do. I told him to check the perimeter cams anyway. He promised he would. By now, I had motion lights synced to a silent alarm on my watch. Every time someone so much as sneezed near my fence, I knew. I set up perimeter spikes at key entry points, low enough not to injure but high enough to ruin someone's week if they weren't paying attention. Cheap and legal. They wanted me to blink. That was the goal. Psychological erosion. The soft kind of war, but I'd worked too many crime scenes not to know what came next when people like Karen didn't get their way. Next time, they weren't going to test the fence. They were going to go through it. I wasn't asleep when it happened. That's the detail people always get wrong later when they retell it like some campfire legend. I wasn't jolted awake, heart racing, scrambling for a weapon. I was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, reviewing footage from earlier that evening. When you spend years walking into burned-out houses where people swore nothing was wrong until it was far too late, you learn to trust patterns more than comfort. At 23 minutes past 2 in the morning, my watch vibrated once. Silent alert. South perimeter. The first camera feed popped up on the tablet. Nothing obvious at first, just the tree line swaying, a smear of darker shadow against a darker shadow. Then the infrared sharpened, and 3 heat signatures resolved into human shapes moving low and deliberate. Too coordinated for teenagers, too slow for drunks. They stopped exactly where the fence dipped toward the electrical panel enclosure. I felt that old familiar tightening in my chest. Not fear, recognition. I slid the tablet aside, stood up, and took the shotgun from the rack by the back door. No rush, no adrenaline spike, just muscle memory. I chambered around, slung on a jacket, and stepped out through the rear exit, keeping the house between me and the south line as long as possible. The night was quiet in that way only rural land gets. No traffic hum, no distant sirens. Just insects and the low creak of trees. As I moved through the brush, I could hear them now. Metal on metal, a dull snip. Someone whispered, sharp and irritated. When I got close enough, I saw everything. They had cut the fence cleanly, folding it back just enough to slip through. One man knelt at the base of the electrical panel with bolt cutters, working on the secondary conduit. Another stood watch with a flashlight wrapped in duct tape to narrow the beam. The third, this one made my jaw tighten, was holding a portable generator, positioned like they planned to power something independently once they severed the main line. This wasn't intimidation anymore. This was infrastructure sabotage. I stepped out of the trees and let the moonlight catch the barrel. "Drop everything," I said. Calm, loud enough to carry. Hands where I can see them. Now. For half a second, nobody moved. Then the man with the flashlight spun, saw me, and screamed, "He's got a gun!" Panic does funny things to people who think they're in control. The man with the bolt cutters fumbled, dropped them, and went to ground like he'd been shot. The lookout bolted toward the tree line without even checking his footing. The third man, the one with the generator, hesitated just long enough to be memorable, then turned and ran. I didn't fire. I didn't need to. They scattered into the woods like startled deer, crashing through undergrowth they clearly hadn't scouted. One of them tripped hard. I heard the crack before the scream, a sharp, wet sound that told me it was bone, not branch. He didn't get far after that. I kept my distance, stayed visible, weapon trained but steady. "Don't move," I told him. "Help is coming." He didn't answer, just groaned and tried to crawl, leaving a trail in the damp leaves. By the time I reached him, the others were gone. He was clutching his ankle, eyes wide, breath ragged. On the ground next to him lay a laminated badge, Clear Pines HOA, Facilities Operations, name printed clean as day. I memorized it before I picked it up. I called the sheriff, reported trespass, and attempted sabotage, and waited. The man passed out before the deputies arrived. They took him away on a stretcher, asking me careful, measured questions while shining flashlights over the scene. They bagged the tools. Took photos of the cut fence, the damaged conduit, the generator. When it was over and the night finally settled again, I went back inside and pulled every camera feed from the last 12 hours. Faces weren't as clear as I'd like, but silhouettes told stories if you knew how to read them. The way one of them moved, shoulders back, deliberate posture, that wasn't a grunt worker. That morning, just after sunrise, Lucille called again. Her voice was shaking, but not scared. "I saw it all," she said. "From my balcony. 3 men, flashlights. I filmed them." She paused, then added, "One of them turned toward the road for a second. I zoomed in. I recognize him." I asked who. She didn't hesitate. Jared Benton, vice president of that HOA, the one who used to work private security. I looked down at the badge on my kitchen counter and felt something settle into place. This wasn't just Karen pulling strings from behind a desk. This was organized, planned, authorized. They hadn't come to scare me. They had come to turn my lights off and see what broke in the dark. I didn't even get a full pot of coffee down before the counterpunch landed. The sheriff's deputies had barely cleared my driveway that morning when my phone started buzzing like a hornet trapped in a jar. Missed calls, voicemails, unknown numbers. By 8 o'clock, my email inbox looked like a landfill. Alerts, forwarded messages, and one subject line that stood out like a bruise. Notice of civil action, Clear Pines HOA. They didn't waste time. Less than 12 hours after their people got caught on my land with bolt cutters and a generator, Clear Pines filed a lawsuit against me. Not against unknown parties. Against me. The claim was bold enough to be insulting. They accused me of threatening authorized inspectors with a firearm, engaging in reckless intimidation, and obstructing the lawful duties of a regulatory body. Regulatory body. That one almost made me laugh. By mid-morning, Karen Vincent was already talking to the local press. I saw her on my television, standing in front of the Clear Pines entrance sign, chin lifted, eyes misty in that practice way that said, "I rehearsed this in the mirror." She told the camera they'd been conducting a routine nighttime inspection of external electrical risks, and that I'd emerged from the woods armed and aggressive, putting lives in danger. Not a word about the cut fence. Not a word about the generator. Not a word about the fact that her HOA had no authority on my land. By noon, the story was everywhere. Headlines used words like armed standoff and reclusive homeowner. One outlet even referred to me as a former investigator with a troubled past, which was interesting, considering nobody had called me yet to ask what that past actually was. 2 sheriff's deputies came back that afternoon, this time with a different tone. Not hostile, but cautious. One of them, a woman named Ramirez, asked if I'd be willing to walk them through the incident again. I agreed. I walked them straight to the south fence, showed them the cuts, the damaged conduit, the tool marks that matched the bolt cutters still sitting in evidence bags. Then I took them inside. I pulled up the footage, every angle, every timestamp. You could see the men arrive. You could see them cut through. You could see the generator. You could hear me issue verbal commands, clear, controlled, no threats beyond lawful defense of property. When the footage ended, there was a long silence. Ramirez finally exhaled. They said this was a visual inspection. I nodded. Funny way to inspect electricity. They left with copies of everything. That didn't stop the HOA. By the next day, a process server showed up with a stack of papers thick enough to stop a bullet. Clear Pines wasn't just suing me. They were asking for a temporary restraining order to seize my weapons, claiming I posed an ongoing danger to community safety. They even included a so-called internal memo describing my land as potentially unstable terrain requiring intervention. The memo had my name typed at the bottom, as if I'd approved it. That was forgery, plain and simple. Royce Collier called me as soon as he saw it. He didn't bother saying hello. "They're trying to flip the board," he said. "If they make you look dangerous, everything else becomes noise." That afternoon, county police knocked on my door again, this time responding to a complaint about shots fired. I hadn't fired a thing. They knew it. The call was logged from a prepaid phone traced back to a gas station less than a mile from Clear Pines. It was harassment, coordinated, methodical. The real twist came when Lucille showed up in person just before sunset, clutching her tablet like it was evidence in a murder trial. She looked furious. "They're lying," she said, before I could even speak. "On camera, on television." I watched that woman look straight into a lens and rewrite the night like you were some lunatic. She handed me the tablet. Her footage was clearer than mine. Balcony height, night mode, steady hands. You could see faces. You could see Jared Benton clearly, no hood, no doubt, standing not 20 feet from my panel gesturing while another man worked the cutters. You could even hear him say, "Hurry it up. If we kill the feed, he'll fold." I watched it twice. That night, Royce filed a counterclaim, trespass, attempted sabotage of private infrastructure, forgery, harassment. He also sent preservation notices to every board member of Clear Pines HOA, ordering them to retain all internal communications, emails, and financial records. An hour later, I got an email from an anonymous address. No text. Just a single sentence in the subject line. "You didn't have to make this hard." That was when I understood something important. They weren't reacting anymore. They were panicking. The email address came up blank. No name. No IP that traced anywhere useful. Just that one line. "You didn't have to make this hard." I stared at it for a few minutes, not because it rattled me, but because it confirmed something I already suspected. They didn't think I was going to push back. People like Karen Vincent run on fear and compliance. They're used to everyone folding when the legalese comes out. They don't know what to do when someone stands up and starts pushing back with receipts. 3 days after the countersuit was filed, Royce called to tell me something strange had happened. One of the HOA's junior inspectors had contacted his office anonymously, asking for a meeting, said he had concerns, would only talk in person. Royce met him in town in the back of a quiet diner. Then he called me right after, his voice sharp with excitement. "You're going to want to hear this," he said. The guy's name was Milo. Early 20s. Nervous, lanky, and apparently related to Karen by marriage, her nephew. He'd been part of the inspection team that night, the one where Benton and his buddies tried to take out my power. According to him, he hadn't known what they were really doing until the last second. "They told me it was a stress test," he said, "to check for weak points in the grid. I didn't know they were going to actually cut the line." Royce had asked him why he was coming forward now. Milo looked away and said, "I didn't sign up to break the law. I thought this was just going to be like landscaping complaints and fence measurements. Not this. Not sabotage." Then he handed Royce a flash drive. I met with him later that evening in the parking lot of a hardware store off Highway 221. He was jittery as hell, checking over his shoulder every 10 seconds. I didn't pressure him, just listened. He said he'd been given access to the HOA's internal email system, billing logs, and private Slack channel, which, for reasons I still don't understand, these idiots were using to coordinate illegal activity. I asked him what was on the drive. "Everything," he said. "Orders, conversations. They were planning to cut you off physically and legally. There's even a budget sheet that lists your name next to the term recapture expenditure. I don't know what it means, but it sounds bad." It sounded like eminent domain without the paperwork. Milo also brought something else, a printed map, folded in half and marked with highlighter. It showed Clear Pines, my property, and a proposed route for an emergency utility easement that ran right through my wellhead and electrical conduit. "I think they were trying to force a hostile takeover," he said. I thanked him, told him he was doing the right thing, gave him my burner number, and told him to stay alert. He nodded, eyes down, and disappeared back into the darkness. That night, I forwarded everything to Royce and started prepping redundancies, double backups of footage, duplicate power systems, even an old diesel generator I hadn't used in years. If they were still planning something, I wasn't going to be caught with my wires down. Meanwhile, Karen was doubling down on her PR campaign. The very next day, a local affiliate ran a special report titled From Hero to Hazard. Who is Ensign Mayfield? The segment was a masterclass in character assassination. They cited unnamed sources who described me as unstable, paranoid, and possibly armed at all times. They flashed a pixelated photo of me from a decade ago, eyes half closed, probably taken after a 48-hour arson scene. Then they dropped the bombshell, a so-called confidential disciplinary file from my time as a fire investigator, claimed I'd been suspended for excessive force during a civilian confrontation. Implication that I was violent, dangerous, unhinged. I stared at the screen, half laughing. Excessive force meant I'd pulled a guy out of a burning car through a broken window. The confrontation, a drunk cousin who wanted to run back in to save a pet snake. I called Royce. "We need to kill this narrative before it spreads," I said. He already had a plan. The next morning, we arranged a live interview with one of the bigger Charlotte stations. Royce sat beside me, calm and polished in a way I could never pull off. He let them play the segment. Then he dropped the receipts. Real employment records, real commendations. A signed letter from my former division chief, describing me as the most reliable fire investigator in the region. Then Royce turned to the anchor and dropped the flash drive on the table. "What is concerning," he said, "is the fact that a private HOA is manufacturing stories, forging internal memos, and coordinating trespass and sabotage against someone who isn't even under their jurisdiction." They aired that segment in full. Then they aired Lucille's footage. High definition, clear faces. Jared Benton front and center, pointing at my breaker box like he was about to steal copper off a cell tower. Public opinion turned fast. But the war wasn't over. That same night, someone spray-painted "Get Out" across my back fence in bright red. They used sealant-based paint, hard to wash, sticks to wood like regret. 2 days later, I found my truck's door handles filled with expanding foam. Malicious, juvenile, and stupid. I had installed 2 new hidden trail cams in the trees. They showed a man in a branded HOA landscaper's polo and ball cap walking up to the vehicle, glancing around, and then stuffing the foam in with a straw. I froze the frame. His face was clear as a sunny day. I had a name. I had footage. I had a rat inside their nest. And the worst part, for them, I was just getting started. I didn't sleep that night. Not out of fear, not anymore. That ship had sailed 2 lawsuits and a sabotage attempt ago. No, I was wide awake because I had momentum. The media was turning. The evidence was solid. And the very people who thought they could surround me were now bleeding cracks like a dam under pressure. At noon, sharp, Royce and I met with the county prosecutor. He reviewed the footage from Lucille's tablet, the confession from Milo, our HOA insider, and the financial documents we'd extracted from the flash drive. Royce handed him a 1-page summary at the end with bolded bullet points. Forgery of compliance notices, conspiracy to disable private infrastructure, trespassing with intent to cause material harm, fraudulent misuse of HOA funds, false public accusations intended to defame and mislead. The prosecutor didn't say much, just nodded grimly and muttered something about crossing the line from civil nuisance to felony territory. As we left the office, my phone buzzed. It was Milo. "You need to see what Karen's planning," he said, breathless. He'd intercepted a string of emails between Karen and the HOA board marked urgent. They detailed a new operation, this one with a ridiculous code name, Operation Perimeter Reinforcement. According to Milo, Karen was panicking. She wanted to initiate a secondary inspection at night to recover physical files and scrub any records from a storage unit the HOA used off-site. More concerning? The emails mentioned hiring non-member consultants. That was HOA speak for contracted goons. They weren't just trying to cover their tracks. They were preparing to destroy them. That evening, I made a full backup of every file I had, footage, emails, Milo's documents, the entire legal chain of custody, and uploaded it to a secure cloud server with distribution triggers. If anything happened to me, Royce and 3 different journalists would get the full package. I knew that night something was coming. At 2:11 a.m., I heard the glass break. It came from the far end of the house, kitchen window, east side. The alarm didn't scream because I'd set it to silent mode. I was still experimenting with how fast I could react without tipping off an intruder. Turns out, fast enough. I grabbed the shotgun and moved low through the hallway. By the time I hit the edge of the living room, I saw it. A glass bottle, charred cloth still smoking, flames licking up the wall near the sink. Someone had thrown a Molotov cocktail through my goddamn window. I doused it with the fire extinguisher before it could spread. Then I ran outside. The motion lights didn't trigger, but the thermal cameras did. A single figure running full tilt toward the tree line. Gray hoodie, dark pants, gloved hands. But I didn't need facial recognition. I already had a lead. 2 days prior, that exact same gate had been captured stuffing foam into my truck handles. It was the HOA landscaper. The next morning, I reviewed the camera angle from the side tree line. It caught him walking in, no attempt to conceal his identity, carrying the same satchel seen in other shots. I froze the frame and sent it to Royce and the sheriff. By 10 a.m., a warrant was issued, and then the dam really cracked. Lucille called just after lunch, laughing so hard I could barely understand her. "You watching the news?" she asked. I wasn't. I turned on the TV just in time to see Karen Vincent walking out of a federal courthouse, flanked by 2 lawyers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The press was swarming her like flies on roadkill. Microphones were shoved at her, people shouting questions about sabotage, arson, fraud. She ignored them for about 5 seconds. Then, on camera, one of the reporters asked, "Ms. Vincent, what do you say to the leaked emails where you called Mr. Mayfield a cancer that needs to be surgically removed from our community?" She stopped, dead in her tracks, looked right into the lens and smiled. "No comment," she said, "but I think the community knows who the real threat is." She had no idea how bad it was about to get, because Milo wasn't done. That afternoon, he called me from a burner phone and said, "I got into her shared drive. There's more. Way more. Financial records. Off-the-book payments to Benton. Vendor kickbacks from HOA-approved contractors. Even more damning, a private exchange between Karen and a regional developer detailing a multi-phase redevelopment proposal, with my property labeled as available pending forced acquisition. They'd planned it for months. Sabotage, intimidation, lawsuits. It was all part of a long-term play to take my land and sell it to a company looking to extend a service road out toward the highway. That night, Royce dropped the nuclear bomb. We filed for a federal injunction requesting a freeze on all HOA financial operations and email servers. 2 days later, FBI agents raided the HOA's office and confiscated computers, printed ledgers, and Karen's personal laptop. Jared Benton was arrested that same night trying to leave the state. They caught him at a gas station with a burner phone, $5,000 in cash, and a duffel bag full of shredded documents. And still, it wasn't over. At dawn the next morning, I found a dead deer carcass strung up on my gate, spray painted across its side in thick red letters. "We know where you sleep." My reaction: I went inside, brewed coffee, called Royce, then called the sheriff. By noon, they'd added terroristic threats to the list of charges. They thought they could scare me off my own land, but all they did was confirm one thing. Now it was personal. They always act tough right until the badge flashes. When the FBI stormed the Clear Pines HOA office, it wasn't some grand movie raid. No battering rams, no flashbangs, just a half-dozen agents in windbreakers calmly walking in with boxes and warrants. And yet, it was enough to turn Karen Vincent into a ghost. For 3 days, she disappeared completely. No public statements. No HOA emails. Her car sat untouched in her driveway like it belonged to someone already dead. But when the grand jury indictments dropped, conspiracy, fraud, attempted sabotage of infrastructure, and obstruction, she crawled back into the spotlight like a raccoon caught in daylight. Her lawyers tried to spin it as miscommunication and overzealous volunteers. They even suggested Jared Benton may have acted outside of protocol. Funny. Hard to argue protocol when your second-in-command gets caught in a gas station with shredded HOA files and fake IDs. The courthouse in Roane County was built during the Truman administration, white stone, small clock tower, a courtroom that still smelled like old wood and floor wax. I'd been in bigger, fancier buildings, but I'd never felt the weight of justice like I did when I stepped into that room for opening arguments. Karen sat at the defense table like she was at a garden club meeting, blouse pressed, hair done, a smug look frozen on her face. But I saw it in her eyes. The panic was there, just buried under 3 layers of rehearsed calm. My testimony was scheduled for day 2. Royce prepped me like I was about to cross enemy lines. No anger, no drama, just facts. We walked through everything: the threats, the trespassing, the generator, the Molotov, the deer carcass. But most damning, the financial trail. Milo's documents had become the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. He testified too. Nervous as hell, but honest. Told the court how Karen had coordinated inspections designed to provoke confrontation, how she had pushed for asset acquisition under the table, how she'd openly called me a problem that needed removal in internal threads. Then came Lucille. God bless that woman. She stood straight as a rifle barrel and played her footage for the jury like she was hosting a film festival. Her voice never wavered, not when she described seeing Jared with bolt cutters, not when she showed the moment one of the men said, "Kill the feed, he'll fold." The courtroom was dead silent. Even the defense attorney looked like he wanted to disappear, but it was the internal emails that broke the dam. Royce dropped them like a cluster bomb, messages between Karen and the HOA board discussing me like I was a landmine in a construction zone, plans to gradually increase pressure, conversations with the contractor about post-acquisition blueprints. One even referred to Lucille as a wild card who may need to be neutralized. That was a mistake. Lucille smiled when they read it out loud. Karen didn't. Cross-examination was weak. The defense tried to paint me as paranoid, unstable, claimed I militarized my land and provoked conflict. Then Royce played the surveillance footage of me giving clear verbal warnings during the night. They tried to cut my power. Calm, lawful, disciplined, no shots fired, no threats made. Just me, standing there like the last man in a storm, protecting what was mine. The courtroom shifted. I felt it. The jury saw it too. You could see it in their eyes. The line had been crossed, not by me, but by the HOA that thought it was the law. On day 5, the verdicts came down. Karen Vinson, guilty on all counts. Jared Benton, guilty on conspiracy, sabotage, and flight from jurisdiction. Karen's cousin, the arsonist landscaper, guilty of attempted arson and terroristic threats. 3 other board members, guilty of aiding and abetting fraud. Then came the restitution phase. Royce stood and read the numbers out like he was calling bingo. $1,100,000 in personal damages for trespass, sabotage, emotional distress, and damage to property. $300,000 in punitive fines against the HOA as an entity. Full legal costs covered by the defendants. Karen didn't flinch when they read the sentence. She just looked at me, stone cold, and whispered something I'll never forget. "You still lose." It was surreal. She was the one in cuffs, being escorted out like a disgraced CEO. And yet, in her warped mind, she believed she had left a scar that wouldn't heal. And maybe she had, because even in victory I felt it, the weight of what had been done. The cameras were still outside the courthouse when I stepped out. Reporters shouting my name, Lucille beside me, cane in one hand, coffee in the other, grinning like she'd just won a poker game. "I told you she'd hang herself," she said. I nodded. She brought the rope. The reporters eventually stopped calling. The lawsuits stopped landing in my mailbox. And the helicopters, the ones that had hovered like vultures over my property during the trial, faded back toward their city roosts. But the quiet, that took longer, not because of fear. That had burned out of me like old oil in a cleaned engine. No, the quiet took time because even after you win, the noise echoes. Karen Vincent was sentenced to 12 years. Jared Benton got 8. And Karen's cousin, who threw the Molotov cocktail, earned himself a neat 10-year bid, plus federal oversight due to the domestic terror enhancement. The rest of the HOA board scattered like cockroaches under federal light. A few tried to quietly move to other states. One reportedly ended up managing a storage unit facility in Kentucky. Fitting. Clear Pines HOA was dissolved under court order, legally disbanded, its charter revoked, funds seized, and properties frozen. Their email servers were used as precedent in a state-level bill protecting homeowners from unauthorized private governance. They called it the Mayfield Provision. No one asked me if they could use my name. I didn't care. Let the paper trail speak louder than I ever could. In the months that followed, something strange happened. People started coming to me, not with lawsuits, not with threats, but with questions. Folks from neighboring HOAs, nearby counties, even a guy from Georgia, all asking how I did it, how I stood up, how I didn't fold. I told them the same thing every time. You don't need to be the loudest, just the one who won't move. Lucille Harper, God bless her, got herself voted head of the new community council, an informal group of residents meant to ensure transparency and mutual respect between homeowners. She didn't want the title. "I've had enough committee meetings to last me 3 reincarnations," she told me. But she took it anyway, said it was time someone with an ounce of spine and 2 ounces of bourbon helped build something decent. The council voted unanimously to remove the old signage from the entrance to Clear Pines. In its place, they put up a hand-carved board that read, "This community respects property, privacy, and people. No exceptions." I liked it better than the HOA's slogan, which had been something like, "Unified Vision, Beautiful Living," which always sounded a little fascist to me anyway. I spent the following spring rebuilding the section of fence they'd cut, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. I reinforced the gate, reburied the electrical conduit, and set up an off-grid solar backup system with enough juice to keep me running, even if someone blew up the substation. That wasn't paranoia. That was called North Carolina common sense. Royce and I stayed in touch. He went on to write a book about the case. Some legal-sounding title I can't remember, but Lucille said it made him look like the next Atticus Finch with a tactical vest. Milo, our former insider, entered witness protection under a new name. Last I heard, he was working IT for a school district somewhere in Idaho. Good kid. Deserved better than the mess Karen dragged him into. As for me, I kept living. I got back to fishing in the mornings, fixing up the shed I'd been ignoring for 3 years. Even took a long overdue trip out west to see the Grand Canyon. When I came back, the house was still standing, the cameras were still rolling, the woods were still quiet, and no one, not one single person, had left a compliance notice on my porch. But I did put up one new sign, right at the gate, burned into a piece of reclaimed oak with lettering Lucille helped me paint. This is not whole land, this is not their authority, and it never will be. I didn't need a fence to prove where my property began. I just needed them to remember where it ends.